Good evening. I'm Lane Harwell, Program Officer, Creativity and Free Expression at the Ford Foundation, and a graduate of Columbia Business School class of 2012. I'm glad to be returning virtually to the Center of Business as moderator for this session, and really grateful that so many in the network have joined us. I hope you are safe and as well as you can be at this time. The topic of tonight's discussion, the show must go on. How to revitalize the arts and creative industries in New York City post-pandemic. We will hear from 3 neighboring arts and culture leaders in Upper Manhattan. Cheryl Anhava, Program Officer, Cultural Investments at Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. Erika Dilday, CEO and Executive Director of Futuro Media Group, and Ty Jones, actor and producing artistic director at Classical Theatre of Harlem. Many thanks to this group for joining us. We'll also have the opportunity to open up the floor to questions from you. I will be taking questions from the question and answer box. Please put your questions there. If you need assistance in your Zoom experience tonight, please use the chat box and let us know. A few data points to help ground the discussion. Americans for the Arts national research shows financial losses to nonprofit arts and cultural organizations are an estimated $5.5 billion. They have also lost 210 million admissions due to canceled events, resulting in a 6.7 billion loss in event-related spending by audiences at local businesses, restaurants, lodging, retail. The economic impact of these losses is 2 billion in lost government revenue and nearly 350,000 jobs no longer being supported. 96% of nonprofits who've responded canceled events. 2/3 of all arts workers are now unemployed, and cultural workers of color and disabled cultural workers are disproportionately hard hit. Commercial theaters and movie theaters shuttered, pop tours were canceled. A study from Theater Communications Group shows audiences' wariness about returning to theaters whenever they open. In New York and elsewhere, they are in later phase openings, phase 4 in New York, perhaps this fall, perhaps 2021. So on the one hand, you have crushing financial blows, you have uncertainty about when and how to move forward. You have a workforce and audiences that are significantly changed. Inequalities in the art sector that existed pre-COVID, have been laid bare and exacerbated. And all of this is magnified in New York City, the cultural capital and the epicenter of COVID-19. Layers of uncertainty on layers of uncertainty. On the other hand, the importance, the value or values of the arts and culture are rendered clearer and clearer. Organizations have jumped into socially distanced digital programming and audiences are jumping online looking for content. Drive-ins have become the family gathering place. Artists are stepping forward to raise funds for frontline workers, and I'll note, not getting paid to do it, which I think is a problem. Teachers are bringing arts programming to school children, and those school children are reporting their arts classes are the most motivating. The arts, experiencing art, making art have been a silver lining to long, worrisome days, a new way for families to express fears and sorrow, endure pain and loss, find calm, and imagine the future. They are a key to our recovery, economic and social, and they need our help. I'm going to stop here on the topic of value and turn to our panelists and ask them to introduce themselves. What is your role and organization, and how are you defining the value of the arts and creativity now in the time of COVID? Cheryl?
Thank you, Lane and Diana, for inviting me to join the conversation today and really for organizing this important discussion. I'm really proud to be amongst today's panelists who share my love and my anxiety for the arts community, especially during this time. So good afternoon to all. I'm really glad to see so many participants. It's certainly further proof of the importance this nation places on the arts, quite frankly. Again, like Lane said, I'm Cheryl Anhava. I'm a program officer at Cultural Investments for the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, also known as UMEZ. UMEZ is the only remaining empowerment zone. We're also the only ones to have invested in the arts. I'm very proud of that. I also serve as co-chair of the New York Grantmakers in the Arts, which serves nearly 200 members from over 100 funding entities. We're unique in that we represent public and private funders of the arts, both equally as important. So how are we valuing the arts? Well, we are evaluating them as essential, that word. This pandemic is leaving thousands of cultural institutions, artists, and art workers stranded and in dire economic straits. Again, all exhibitions, live performances, and art-related gatherings, of course, have been canceled, but really the problem goes well beyond that. I think it's really not exactly a secret that the art world has always suffered from a lack of recognition and respect for its contributions to the economy. And while I consider it essential, others do not, though I don't necessarily understand why this is the case. The arts and cultural sector contributes billions of dollars to the nation's GDP each year. The most recent data out of the National Endowment for the Arts from 2016 was reported as $804.2 billion, or 4.3% of the GDP. UMEZ, for example, so we don't fund the arts for art's sake. Instead, we fund the arts with the understanding that it directly contributes to the local economy, the economic vitality and the vibrancy of the neighborhood, and in our case, it's Upper Manhattan. In this moment, UMEZ and most New York funders are really providing immediate relief. We're just hoping to ensure organizations and artists survive this crisis. Funders are all executing their first tranche of response, but also exploring longer term efforts, which I suspect we will be exploring later in this conversation. And with that, I will pass it off.
Great. Ty, Erika?
Okay, I will go ahead. One thing that I want to emphasize about the arts, especially in Upper Manhattan and in other communities where you have larger marginalized populations, there seems to me to be a belief that in addressing the issues and the ills of our communities, that the answer is to deal with the very basic human issues of health and well-being and financial stability. But one thing that I think gets missed is that the arts and the ability to participate in the arts, the ability to appreciate them, is very much part of the well-being of all of us. It's important to our mental health. So many of us, when we're at home, have turned to movies and books and music and things that have been created by artists. And I feel that often in communities of color, there is this belief that, well, it's not as important because we've just got to worry about, you know, the very basic needs of food and shelter. But you don't get that same response in other communities where there is a belief that there's a much more holistic need. And I think for us, it's extremely crucial. It's extremely important. And the level of self-expression and self-soothing and mental well-being that people get through their interaction with the arts is incredibly important to the way they handle health issues and the way they have an outlook on life and their ability to really continue to function. And we've got to appreciate that this is very much a crucial part of our recovery. It's not an add-on.
Hi, my name is Ty Jones. I am the producing artistic director of the Classical Theatre of Harlem. My sort of comprehensive experience is essentially in a small market performing art company. Right now, I continue to lead and sort of orchestrate the turnaround of the Classical Theatre of Harlem. We were at one point in time $400,000 in debt. We're now completely debt-free. We're in a position to to steadily grow the company in a measured capacity, just trying to maximize the resources that are available to us. I have to say that, as we, talk about how we continue our work and sort of revitalize this sector, for CTH, for the Classical Theatre of Harlem, the question is, how do we not only thrive, but how do we also survive? And I look at it in three buckets. So first is an absolute commitment to the arts, to live theater. Forgive me for this crass joke, but it's like if you want to be pregnant, one of the traditional ways to do it is just to do it. You got to commit to it. And that's what I am doing. I'm committing that we will get to a place where we will be in audiences once again, experiencing art. So we've got to assert that arts are necessary and they are a part of community maintenance. Second is that we are creating digital content right now in the interim. And then third, we are taking measured steps at reopening. Would you like me to sort of articulate, the thoughts about how we're thinking of reopening?
Sure.
Okay, so let me just say this out, and I'm willing to have debate. I'm willing to take hits for it. And I am somebody who believes that we should find a way to reopen. I imagine that some folks are predisposed ideologically to think a different way, but I think that there is a measured way of going about that. And and I'm not just saying it because of how I feel. About 10 days ago, the Senate had a hearing. And so that was Dr. Fauci, Dr. Hahn, and the other gentleman Dr. Redfield. And it was a 3.5-hour Senate hearing. I watched the whole thing, and there were specific targets that were specific to states and cities that needed to be hit, certain buckets that needed to be hit. And once those things were hit, there was a plan on how to find a measured way to reopen. And I think that the task force and their ideas on how to reopen were good. I walked away from watching that 3.5-hour hearing with that task force with hope. No joke, I really did. Now I have to admit, what was put out in the news afterwards were just sort of hits about certain people saying things. But when I watched that whole thing, I walked away going, I know why I feel confident that we can get back to a place where we have audiences again with no agenda other than to see a great piece of art. And that's where I'm hoping that we'll be able to get back to. So in terms of the steps, we're actually preparing a PowerPoint presentation as we speak with cogent step-by-step processes on how an arts organization would open up outdoors. So Classical Theatre of Harlem wants to be an example. We want to be a template on how to open up slowly and following those guidelines. And obviously, in order for us to do that, we're going to need our funders and we're going to need our supporters on our side to be successful, to be able to take this plan that we're going to put together with that PowerPoint presentation to the Department of Parks and Recreation. So as of right now, June 30th, all non-essential permits have been canceled. We have a permit starting July 1st. I imagine folks are still have some anxiety about getting together, but I really, truly believe that as long as we closely monitor all the multifaceted impacts of COVID-19 and strictly adhere to all the city, the state, and federal and health guidelines, we can do that. And plus, we have to, there must always be a spark to put a flame in motion. So we gotta try. And I think we can do it in a safe way. And in doing so, we have to also think about liability. We have to think about, without question, safety. We have to think about having, civil servants there, perhaps having a doctor at the space. But we want to be able to put together this plan to show our supporters and funders about how we think that this could work. Let me be crystal clear. We're not going to be able to put on a show like we normally do. So we don't have our sets and we don't have the lights that we normally do. So what we would do is make a very small version. We would shrink the stage down. We would get in touch with some of our partners, people with whom we partnered in the past, like the Chamber Music Society of New York City. Ask them for trios of folks to get together and play. Obviously, they need to be physically distanced a certain amount. And also, we'll make sure that the audience is physically distanced a certain way, and do everything we can to at least be an example for other arts organizations about what is, a template of how we might possibly be able to do this.
Thank you, Ty. One of the bold leaders moving forward with a plan to reopen and soon. Erika, you also run a cultural institution here in Upper Manhattan. Could you tell us a bit about what you're doing to continue the work and help the arts revitalize now and post-pandemic?
Sure. I run an organization called Futuro Media Group. We produce audio and video documentaries and digital content for and about people of color and marginalized communities. And the essence of what we do is storytelling, and storytelling from an authentic point of view. So we believe that part of telling stories is not just someone taking the story and interpreting it for you, but unlocking the story from that primary source and being the catalyst to share that story. A lot of the work we do is on the history, the culture, the things that are important to people who live in marginalized communities and neighborhoods, and that they are the narrators. For too long, people have been helicoptering in and trying to tell the stories of other people that aren't theirs to tell. The way I put it is, we want to hold the microphone for people to tell their stories as opposed to speak into it for them. Now more than ever during this crisis, we are finding that people need that connection with their communities. One of our big projects is the Community Media Lab, where we work with people who have no experience in, say, audio or video storytelling, but who are storytellers, to share the stories that they think are important to their communities and about the neighborhoods where they live and work and have grown up, and where they understand who they are and what they are. And we started this project initially in Harlem when I was at Maisels Documentary Center with court-appointed youth who wanted to be able to share who they were without having preconceived notions. And it has grown to be both video shorts and also audio podcast, where people address issues that they think are stories that need to be told about who they are and where they are. All of our stories are based in truth. We have some things that may end up dramatized somewhat with explanation, but most of our stories are journalistic in nature. And it is now more important, especially in this time, that we tell the stories of people who are being ignored, of people who seem to be just a statistic because they're in the Bronx and they, are recovering from COVID-19, but they just seem like a statistic to the rest of the world. To put faces and names and personalities with the people who are really part of the fabric of where they are, and also for people to understand what makes up a community, a particular community, whether they're part of it or not, and to bring us all closer together. And we have found that we had to adjust how we've been doing that. So much of it requires, a face-to-face, a person-to-person connection. And we've been working to do that through Zoom, through I think people use even, their phones and record and reach out to us and us to them electronically. But, I agree with Ty, the face-to-face collective experience of the arts, which I think is so important, isn't something that we can sacrifice. It's something that we as an arts community and as entrepreneurs have to figure out, how do we get this? How do we make this work again? And it may not be exactly the same as it was before, but we need to make it work again. We need to be able to put that human connection and interaction in the arts. It can't all be via screen.
Thanks, Erika. Ty, Erika, I'm just going to stay with you as representatives of cultural groups for a moment and invite you to speak about how your work aligns with field trends as you see them. If there are bright spots in the field, you seeing folks moving the needle forward for the arts sector?
Sure, I can start with that one. One of the things that I have been extremely heartened by is how a lot of arts funders have risen to the occasion and not only realize that it is important to support the arts sector so that we can keep going, we can keep employing people, we can keep moving forward, but also to say, what else can we do to help you figure out how to keep doing the things you're doing when your old model just doesn't apply right now. And so that to me has been the brightest spot. I've been overwhelmed by the amount of support that we've gotten from funders. I mean, and speaking of funders, one of the most overwhelming supporters was, we have a young woman in the Bronx who's one of our individual members who doubled her gift from $5 a month to $10 a month because she said, what you guys are doing is even more important now and I want to support it. And that to me, one, meant so much, but two, shows how people really do understand that they have to be part of the solution to keeping the arts going.
Thank you. Ty,
Yes.
you laid out a plan for reopening.
Yeah.
But in making that plan, you're bold in this space. Could you talk a little bit about how you see your work fitting in with field trends and what's going on out there?
Well, I want to reiterate what Erika said. It's great how funders have stepped up in the interim. It was absolutely necessary. And I also love that, and I know this may sound a bit strange, that it forced us to really dig deep internally as an organization. It made my staff, it made my board really be vigorous about what it is to support an arts institution. And, not that I would ever want something like this sort of black swan moment to ever happen again. But at the end of the day, I have to be able to try to take whatever sort of positivity or some sort of affirmative way of approaching and making decisions about what's happening. And so what I see is that I think a lot of folks are being radically honest about where we are as institutions. I have said to folks that, when this happened, 10 years ago, when we had the financial crisis, back in 08, 09, the financial crisis, thousands of not-for-profits closed, which tells me that a number of these institutions probably won't come to the rescue of a lot of not-for-profits. And I have a feeling that that may happen again right now. So being able to have the kinds of conversations that are really honest, and especially the financial ones as well, in a strange way, we have seen ourselves get to a place where we can strengthen the internal mechanisms, the internal health of Classical Theatre of Harlem. Now, some of the things that help us out is that we don't have a piece of property, right? So we're pretty, we're itinerant. We're flexible. So, one of the conversations that comes up is a very simple one. Board. We know what your give-get is. In order for other funders to take us seriously, we need to make sure that you guys are not only doing your give get, but even possibly doubling your give get in this particular circumstance. That will tell other funders, or particularly, next year, we don't know if the funding is going to come back. And even if it does come back, they may say, hey, we gave you guys $50,000 this year, but because your programming is limited, X, Y, Z, whatever it may be, we're only going to give you 10 this year or whatever. Or some may just say, we're out. I love that we've been able to have these tough kinds of conversations with the board in a way to say, hey, if you guys aren't the ones that are willing to take on your organization away, we can't have that expectation of funders. So it allows us to really, work that muscle about what it is to be a business. And I have to admit, I also love how other organizations are supporting other organizations. So, for example, I think one of the most important things that has really expressed itself right now is food insecurity and housing insecurity. So we have a grant with Bank of America, and we were the first arts organization to receive a grant under the Neighborhood Builders Program. So what we did, and what we've done, is that we will take information from the organizations that work with Bank of America, who do work on food security and housing security, and we'll use our e-blast list. We'll use, the folks who are tethered to us to let them know, either through social media or through our blast, hey, if you are in need of X, if you are in need of Y or Z, this is where you can find that. And so it gives us an opportunity to connect with other not-for-profit organizations who are trying to fill gaps, gaps that have been widened, due to the current circumstance.
Thanks, Ty. Now, so funders have come up now a couple of times. I'm going to pass it to you, Cheryl. So you could share just from your UMES and New York Makers in the Arts philanthropic perspective on what's happening. What's there be now?
Well, you can obviously see artists don't stop, and neither should we, quite frankly. We all need to be advocates, and there's different types of funding pool. Because we're with Columbia right now, I'm gonna go to my favorite economist, is John Keynes, who did support the arts, particularly opera, dance, and drama. He also helped secure government funding for the various arts venues. And we have to realize that Upper Manhattan arts organizations are very dependent on government funding, which makes me anxious. So again, all of our roles really should be advocacy. And of course, going back to my earlier point, if we view culture as essential, it will essentially be treated as such. I suspect, however, for this room and for my husband's preferred economist, Milton Friedman, he would have been much more a fan of private philanthropy's response. So I will talk a little bit about both and really talk about the snapshot of the field and our response, meaning from kind of the grant makers in the arts, specifically New York. And so right now, I think we're really seeing an immediate and very swift reaction from the funding community through emergency relief funds. There are several. Some are focused on organizations and others on individual artists, and of course by sector, dance, theater, music, arts, education, and so on. I think we're really working together more so than we've had in the past to help create and then implement these funds. We're also seeing a huge focus on a more equitable response. Maybe it's right-sizing the wrongs of the past, but it's also, I think, like Ty or Erika said, or both pointed out, this pandemic has disproportionately impacted communities of color, which is our community. We also want to ensure that all of our cultural organizations survive this, and not just the big guys. So along with funds, there's been a real increase in technical assistance, helping organizations to access these emergency funds, not overburdening them with unnecessary paperwork, providing crisis management, communications, social media expertise, financial advisement, and really even helping organizations negotiate leases at this point. And it's not easy for every organization to just dive right back into programming, particularly the vultural realm. And I feel like there's a huge debate going on right now. Some say large organizations will be able to adapt. They have the resources, the endowment, the wealthy board, etc. Others say smaller organizations will be fine because they have lower overhead. But I think many feel it's really the mid-sized organizations who will be the most impacted. They have little or no endowment, full staff, rent. And there's been this real push over the last few years, funny enough or not funny, right? It's been a trend by the funders. We didn't want organizations to become over-reliant on us, so we wanted them to build their earned revenue stream, right? So now that's at zero. So, but ultimately, I think all organizations are left vulnerable during this crisis. I was also recently reminded that Upper Manhattan many of our organizations kind of just got our foot in the door with the larger foundations, providing them with real funding, meaning 6 figures, multi-year. So, and again, this only happened within the last 10 years, maybe even less. So I think, like Ty pointed out just now, there's a very real fear that will be neglected again. And so it's our opportunity to really ensure that that does not happen. So as far as a response for future funding, I don't have one answer. I don't think anybody does. I know that we're all reevaluating our giving strategies. Some are providing pure general operating support. Some others are eliminating application reporting processes. Others are providing tools, funding for the tools required to create programs digitally. Some are advancing funds. I have to say, though, I really do think funders in general are providing great flexibility, which is again, something I hope that transitions over in the future. Ultimately, and I'll be quick, ultimately, philanthropists, our first instinct was to kind of throw money at the problem as quickly and broadly as possible. It did create extraordinary collaborative funds with unprecedented speed. So bravo, I do think that's great. But these funds are really meant as an emergency bridge and not meant to replace a year or perhaps more of lost income. So we're really currently analyzing the field to determine how, where, and which kinds of support would be most impactful. There's a lot of uncertainty, but it is, again, our role to respond to the needs of our partnering organizations, like the two that that my fellow panelists today. So it's kind of surveying the field and figuring out how best to support them, whether it's wanting to do a program July 1, whether it's wanting to do virtual program. I think we're right now just kind of figuring out how to respond.
Thank you, Cheryl. And just as a reminder to everyone, we'll be taking questions through the Q&A box. You can put your questions there and let us know. If you like a question, it'll rise to the top in that list. I'm just going to put one more question to the group, given the timing. You're getting snapshots here, different perspectives before opening it up to the room. And the question is this: we have a group of folks we can't see on the phone, who on Zoom, who represent, current and future business and social enterprise leaders. What is their role? How can they jump in and help now to revitalize the arts? Cheryl's hand is up for it.
They can give. No, I mean, again, it's the advocacy component. When you go home to stream another performance or film, specifically Futuro Media Group and the Classical Theatre of Harlem, we can share, donate, and we can pay for those services. A lot of right now is trying to figure out how to monetize programming that wasn't necessarily monetized or treated as such in the past. So it's a very big role that everyone has right now.
Thanks, Cheryl. Ty, Erika? You're on mute there, Ty.
Was going to defer to Erika.
Oh, thank you.
She's far more articulate, so.
One thing that I would say is important is to think of the what's next. We have had a lot of immediate concern about the arts and what we're going to do, but just as the effects of this disease on individuals and communities is going to be long-lasting, there's going to be a long-lasting effect on the arts. And I'm less worried about what's going to happen a month or two from now. What really worries me is a year or two from now, when people have stopped having this concern top of mind and the arts are still trying to thrive and succeed and grow in an environment that is so uncertain. And I think what we need is the dedication of, like the smart people that we have on the phone to continue to be concerned about how the arts thrive, not just today and not just, for the end of this summer or any particular season, but in the long term. We need that dedication because the issue is not going to disappear. The crisis is not going to disappear, and we need that attention.
Thanks, Erika. And I'll just shift to the questions which any of you can take as they come in. So there's a question about the digital space. And it's something that we've talked about offline before, so I'll ask it quite broadly. What is this shift to the digital space, and what is its future? And someone asks directly here, while the online TV screen experience can be satisfying for some performing arts, what do we do to revive those art forms such as dance, where it simply doesn't translate well onto screen?
Okay, I'll jump in. So I agree. Theater is not the same. I'll try to just get right to the point. So we are where we are. This is the hand that we've been dealt. We need to be entrepreneurial, as you spoken about earlier. We need to make the kind of choices and, again, commit that we will get on the other side of this. So in the interim, there has to be hard choices. So I am very good friends with Tiffany Ray Fisher of Elisa Monte Dance. And what she does is she takes her team. Yeah, she's awesome. She takes her team and they will set up Instagram stories. They will set up, Twitter stories. They will exercise. They will invite people to come in and watch what they do for the day. That I just think that's what's going to have to happen in the interim. And yes, theater and dance may not translate as well, or it doesn't translate the same thing as when it does live. But that is the hand that we're dealt. We're going to have to dig in. And me, as a theater producer, I'm going to do everything I can to try to take my audience to go and watch what Tiffany is doing. And Tiffany will probably do the same thing for me as well. So this is a perfect opportunity for us as artists to do what we've been taught to do, which is work together. That's essentially what we're here for. We're here to take the attention off of ourselves to be of service. So this is a perfect opportunity to try to do that.
Thanks, Ty. Anyone else want to jump in on that one? I'll shift to
You're a dance guy. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm a dance guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a dance guy too, and a funder. So I have thoughts on what's been said. This next question, it says, in terms of funding, Cheryl made a good point about giving funds with minimal paperwork or burden to the nonprofit. Will this crisis help drive more unrestricted funding to the nonprofit sector, or are there other ways to advocate for that? I can chime in there too in a bit, but Cheryl?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a discussion we're all having, and it's an obvious one. And it's honestly a discussion we've been all having even before this, is how we make the funding easier, more accessible, less burdensome. You know, we don't want to take away resources towards programming to write a grant. I don't think that was any one of our intentions going into this. So it's something that we've been talking about before. Now that we're actually making it happen, it's easier for us to, just like any other organization, you know, when you're working remote, saying, well, now look, we can work remote, we showed you. It really is the funders' opportunity to say, we're making this happen because we have to, we can continue this. So I do think we're going to see a lot more of that.
My instinct is the same. There's a group that banded together, Ford was a part of, to start a pledge around flexible giving now at the time of COVID. And this is really just acting on learning that's been done before. Those groups who have the most flexible funding, the most general support, are the best positioned to deal with blows when they come. And it shouldn't be that they're dealt the general support just when the blow comes, but down the road, they need to build it into the infrastructure. Just to shift to another question, funding related, but not specifically, which is, what's the most effective way to support individual artists right now?
I can tell you what we've done. So there are some funds out there, several funders out there that actually target individual artists. So what we do is that, again, it's pretty simple. We take our e-blast list, we take our social media profile, and we will blast out to folks. And of course, we also know some individual people as well, and we'll say, hey, look, this is available. Again, I think it's about us using our platform to inform others, including artists as well.
And we work with a lot of freelancers and people who otherwise might not be connected to larger funding communities. So one of the things that we've tried to do is include freelancers and individual artists who might not have the same resources in a lot of the grants and a lot of the asks that we're making right now. And also just being aware that that community in particular is really suffering. We've gone out of our way to put together a list. Actually, we put together a list in 3 groups of those who we think will be most affected, those who we think, you know, we can use immediately, and those who we think are okay, but we still want to continue to check in on them. And as an organization that works with all of those people to try and check in, it's, you know, it's illustrators, it's musicians, it's writers, it's a number of different people who we work with, but knowing that this would disproportionately affect, you know, creators who are in the gig economy. We're doing our best to try and be something of a touchstone to help them both get the resources they need and also to provide opportunities in a way that we might not have thought about it before.
And I'll just jump in to offer the example of the Artist Relief Fund, which is a national effort where a number of funders of individual artists have banded together in a way that's quite novel as well. United States Artists, Creative Capital, for example, and launched with a $10 million fund for individuals. Now they received something like 60,000 applications in their first couple of phases. So the demand is much greater than the supply. But if you're looking for a way to give to individual artists, that's one. Ford is focused quite a bit of its support on intermediaries that align with our mission, which is, as sort of Erika points out, you know, in serving those voices that have been unheard, those stories that have been untold, and working with national partners such as National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, International Associations of Blacks in Dance, colleague intermediaries. We've been able to reach communities that are priorities for us. Excuse me for that. I'm gonna shift this to a question that I saw that's related to Erika's response about mid-size organizations and mid-size organizations who don't necessarily have the spotlight for funders. How do they get funders' attention in this moment? Cheryl?
I'm sorry, Cheryl or Erika?
Cheryl.
Okay.
The question is, Erika had said, you know, she's some of her work is getting individuals in contact with stakeholders who haven't seen them. What do you tell the mid-size arts organization who doesn't have strong relationships with the funding community? How do they get heard and seen in this moment?
Okay, sorry, that was for me and not Erika, correct? Okay. You know, I think accessibility is an issue for every size organization. You know, I do think mid-size organizations have a huge role to play. I think certainly a lot of small to mid-sized organizations pay more attention to community as well. There are a lot of grants out there for mid-sized organizations. So I would say look at the different resources under NYFA, certainly under any of the government funding, government funds, NEA, NISCA. They have great resource lists for, and I don't know what we mean by mid-sized organization, but certainly there's a huge, even, you know, the Emergency Impact Fund under New York Community Trust. I mean, the focus was on small and mid-sized organizations. So I think as funders, we're paying more attention to that. So that's another area, a resource that an organization can access for funding.
May I jump in?
Please.
Go ahead, Lane.
No.
So I am somebody who is probably in the same game where we're trying to get the attention of funders all the time. So there is no magic way of doing it. It is patience and perseverance. So for me, my experience, and I've been in my position for 10 years now, is, you know, there were times where I would actually go to UMES. This was before the days of Cheryl. Cheryl was probably still in high school. She's young, y'all. Anyway, and I literally would just walk into the office, speak to the leaders at the time, and say, hey, what's possible? What could I do? Can I sit down with someone? Can I make an appointment? And they were nice enough to at least sit down with me. They did not promise me any money, but I persevered. And it takes that type of perseverance. The way I look at it is that your organization, you know, you have to be the chief cheerleader for it. And in order to find success, you are going to have a lot of no's. You're going to have have to have a thick skin in this. And never say no to yourself. Keep going until at least somebody says no to you before you move on to the next person.
It's true. I think Ty can actually teach a course on this, and I'm very serious about that. I've seen him ask very boldly, and honestly, most of the time you do get it, Ty. I do want to piggyback off of that and say you're right that there's even just cold calling and reaching out randomly to organizations. I think they're much more accessible to that type of outreach nowadays.
One other thing, and I'll make it quick. Sorry, Lane. If you can get yourself invited to galas, other people's galas, it's a great thing. One of the first grants that I got invited to, it escapes me right now, but I got invited to a gala. I started talking to the funders who were there about Classical Theatre of Harlem, and one of them ended up giving me a grant.
Thanks. So I'll just throw a couple more questions out for you all to take what you like. Assuming outdoor performances are viable in terms of audience, how do performing companies deal with the need for cast members to be in close proximity to each other or touching? And I'll just throw out a couple more because of where we are with the time. Do any of the panelists have any recommended sources for opening plans? Most plans seem to focus on restaurants, and it's been hard finding reopening strategies for small theaters.
May I just jump in? I'll try to answer really quick. Assuming outdoor performances are viable. So I think whoever is the producing artist or the artistic director, they probably should do a show with this is just my advice, a small cast first. Do something with a small cast. Basically create like a pilot program for yourself before you start doing a big cast. So that's how I would approach that. in terms of the restaurants. So I do believe that somebody needs to put together a plan. We're going to try to put one together. And part of that plan is talking to local businesses to support you, to say, hey, look, we support this idea of arts opening back up because that's foot traffic to my business. So I think it's important to have multiple strategies working at the same time.
Thanks. I mean, my read from it is that there's a lot that's still being figured out, but we will soon have the precedent set by other states that have opened up about how to do this work. New York City has a task force, a reopening task force that includes a committee of arts, entertainment, tourism leaders. So the city is listening to our field. And it's, you know, it's a work in formation, and, you know, excited about the ways that groups will be sharing information. Erika, do you have any thoughts about?
It's actually, I think, a great question, and one that we were debating today, because we have a lot of people who record in studios together. Studios by their nature are very much enclosed spaces. So how do you protect people? How do you have more, you know, several people in at a time, which you need to do a production? And one of the things that we've been looking at doing is, how do we create the same way people are doing their social bubbles? How do we create around the talent that we have that will be broadcasting and recording on a regular basis, like a clean bubble, so that they will feel comfortable with each other and recording with each other? Now, of course, in the work we do, a lot of telling stories is going out to get people's stories. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out right now is how you do that. I mean, part of it is that it's going to have to be done, and we are going to have to keep as many precautions as we can in place. I mean, you can't really record good sound if you have a mask on. So how do you get around that? Do you stay in your house? So what we've done, at least initially, is we've kept to, like Ty said, a very small group of people who are allowed to record together. And we are recording storytelling subjects from different, you know, on their iPhones, or, you know, sending them recorders and having them send them back. But it's, you know, it's a constant question. And I think one of the things that we have to accept is that the plans that we put together this week may change next week. And we just have to be clear on two things. One, people's comfort, health, and safety are, you know, paramount to anything. And number two, that, as you know, this conversation is titled, the show must go on. So we have to find a way to do it. And I think if we keep those two things in mind, we'll eventually get there. But, you know, both of them are equally important, and, you know, time will tell.
Thank you so much. I think that there's a question here. You're doing such, you know, terrific work, leading your organizations forward through this crisis. I think there's a question for me about scale that ties in here, which is, you know, if you're doing this work and this learning, how does it ripple across the field? Your reopening plan, you know, how are you learning from others, and how are you going to share your learning? You know, to the question about where to find these plans, you know, I previously run a service organization for the dance field, Dance NYC. I called me a dance guy. And an organization like that becomes of more critical value in a moment of crisis, where it becomes a sort of conduit to resources and a place for folks to go to share with each other. Are there networks that you're plugged into, places that you would suggest for resources? Ty, maybe in the theater community, Erika in the media space.
One more time, are there networks? Well, maybe Erika, you go ahead, and then
No, that's okay. I mean, and I'll repeat it just to make sure. Lane, you're saying, are there networks that we're tied into that are giving us support? One of the most helpful networks that I am part of right now is an ED network for creators of documentary, film, audio, where we meet every 2 weeks for a Zoom breakfast, bring your own breakfast, where we are able to discuss who's heard about this grant and who's faced this issue, etc. I am finding that the networks that we are part of, including National Arts Society and National Arts Strategies, are doing a good job of trying to bring us all together to discuss these issues. And individually, I feel that people are reaching out. I think we're realizing that, cliche as it sounds, that we are stronger together, because you don't know everything. I don't know everything, but together we can share knowledge and know a whole lot more. So I really think that's a lot of it. Even conversations like these that you're having now, I think are essential to the field, so that we know what's out there and what's potentially out there and can lean on each other.
Perfectly said. The only thing I'll add is that I can't tell you how many different Zoom calls have been on, whether it's dealing with Department of Cultural Affairs or, EDs, ADs, whatever it is. I just think now it's time to take some action, measured and very thoughtful, but we gotta, it's time to take action. That's just how I feel about it. I hope I'm not offending anybody by that. And because I have oceans of empathy for anyone who may be dealing with, some of the complications around this virus. But we have had conversations for 3 months now, and I think that we have really smart people that can now put the spark, hit the spark to put the flame in motion. We can do this. And
Revolution will not be televised.
Amen.
These sound like the right kind of parting words. Are there any more, any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience today?
One of the things I would just say is that there is a sort of macro conversation that needs to be had. One of the, I would love to see artists, be able to say with one united voice, one of the things that would be very helpful to every field is like universal health care. So when people are out there bamming their, the pots and pans, it would be lovely to hear a chorus of voices also say universal health care, because that would be a way that could really help out any field, particularly the artist field. I think anybody in a leadership position, whenever a crisis comes along, one of the most important things one has to do is to make sure those whom they lead don't panic, that they feel safe. And healthcare is one of the things that people think about, and money is the other thing. So I really would have wished to have seen, or maybe there's still a possibility for that same chorus of voices to talk to our representatives and talk about, possibly looking at the W-2s that people had last year and writing that check for them. Because if people have money in their hands to be able to feed their kids, I want to make sure that my neighbor is a happy neighbor. And I want to make sure that we can be able to do the types of things that move people in profound ways and also measurable ways as well.
Thank you, Ty. And we are at time. We're at time to thank our essential workers. So I hope that you will join me in thanking the folks who've been on Zoom with us today. Sorry to those of you whose questions we didn't get to. I've tried to answer a couple in the chat box, but really appreciate you listening in today. And thank you for all you're going to do to help revitalize the arts sector going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we still answer these questions by text?
That's a good question. I'm going to keep at it.
All right.
Okay. And Lane, you can give the person who asked about the midsize, you can give them my email if you want. I'll help them.
Nice.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
All right. So Lane, you're going to stay on and answer questions?
I am. I don't know if we're still live.
If we're still live, I'll be happy to help answer some of these questions as well.
You guys are still live.
Oh, we are still live.
Okay, well, I'm here. My wife has given me permission. I've got a hall pass.
Okay, I was going to do the chat box, but here, let's go. I'll put the questions to you.
Okay.
How will arts continue in the COVID-19 period? For example, will theaters be able to drive attendance numbers high enough to break even if social distancing remains in place?
So I think if you're talking, obviously it looks like you're talking about going indoors. I think it's going to be important before you try to do that is to take cues from the bigger institutions like sports. Let's see what they're doing first. If they're just going to play sports without anybody in the audience, that's one thing. But I have a feeling that we're going to see that somebody, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, soccer, whatever it is, somebody is going to try and have an audience spaced appropriately, distanced appropriately, and for an event. And I think it's going to be important to try. I think that's my suggestion, is to see what the big fellas do first, because they have this. They if they fail, they have room to fail. So I would really want someone to take a cue from somebody who has room to fail first before you try something and it doesn't go well and you mortgage your organization.
Great, thanks. Ty, related, for indoor venues, how do you support the cost of running the house if you can't sell 50 to 70% of tickets, especially in the with union contracts that require a certain number of staff per section open regardless of whether the section is full?
Okay, that sounds like like Broadway or something along those lines. So I'm not a Broadway producer. All I can say, the best answer that I could give you for something along those lines is, again, look to people who have room to fail first. Let them be the ones that that do the experiment first to see how successful they are. If the bigger places are having no issue with people coming in, people, because I imagine there could be liability issues as well, as like the place wasn't clean enough, I'm suing you, and all those kinds of things. I think you should to take a cue from a bigger institution, because if you're somebody who has money to burn, a lot of Broadway producers do, then go for it, and then hopefully you can be the example on how or how other theaters could open.
Great. Couple questions that have just come in. Many of us are administrators with interest in joining the nonprofit arts workforce to help these organizations survive in the COVID crisis. However, the job market is frozen. Do you have recommendations on how to search for job opportunities for us?
So I'll preface this by saying, like, between spring and summer, we employ up to like 150, 160 people. And right now, our strategy is to take the core people, which is 7, and make sure that we can preserve their salaries and their health care. So I have, again, I deeply feel for where you are in terms of looking for jobs in the arts field. There's only one story that I can give you, and it's a true story, and it's based on my board member. His name is Brad Bender. He is an executive at Google. He came to New York City with the same sort of dreams that I had, with being an actor. And as you know, it happens with a lot of actors, they need a survival job. His survival job was being at a place called DoubleClick. I don't know if you guys have heard that company, but it was a temp job that turned it into a full-time job because he loved, computers and loved the tech world. And long story short, Google ended up buying DoubleClick, and he is now not only in a position, he's not really acting anymore, he's working for Google, but now he's in a position to actually fund the arts. So if you can take your creativity skills and put it in a different space for now, who knows what's possible. So like right now, I'm basically a suburban dad living in a concrete jungle, all right? I am not wealthy, I'm not rich or anything like that. I'm able to pay my bills. Things are a little bit tough right now because as an actor, no film, no TV, no commercials, no voiceovers are really happening. We've got to be smart with every dollar that we spend in my household. So with that said, I think it is a possibility to try to look at, chances of working in the tech industry because they are hiring, and who knows what could happen.
Thanks, Ty. And Ty, I have a couple very specific questions for
Sure.
you. Ty Jones, outdoor performances with 6-inch distancing circle markers clearly marked, limited to 1 to 2 attendees makes perfect sense. Audience size will be significantly less to start.
I agree.
Would you consider increasing ticket prices by 10 to 15% in order to help cover costs? Early adopters of this new approach for the arts will most likely agree to this increase.
I think it's going to be up to the organization. For us, we're going to do it entirely free. So we're not charging tickets. We will ask for donations. We'll do that beforehand as we, market the event. So the idea, just to give you a little bit more detail. So we have permits for the month of July. There's no way that we're going to be able to perform throughout the month of July. So we'll probably take 1 week, which most likely will probably be towards the end of July to give us enough time, and perform Tuesday through Friday. And the idea, again, is to talk to some of our partners like Jazzmobile, get a jazz quartet, they'll play, and then we'll create interstitials with that jazz quartet, where myself or Carl Cofield, our associate artistic director, will wrangle monologues from folks that are talking about whatever we want them to talk about, the Harlem Renaissance, their experience in COVID-19, and our plan is to open that up internationally. So people overseas who are dealing with this virus, we hope that they'll be able to write a monologue, and then somebody in Harlem, in between the sets of people performing, will be able to perform that monologue, and then we get right back to the music again. So our goal is to do it for free for all. There are no barriers to entrance whatsoever. We do expect that the audiences to be a little bit lower, but there are some folks who are like that they really truly believe that people are going to be dying and itching to get together again. And who knows, we may have a crowd that that we're going to have to be really mindful on how we manage if indeed there's a lot of folks. But I tend to believe the same thing. There's still going to be a lot of anxiety around it, and people will, we may not have big audiences. But if you're actually charging for tickets, I don't see any problem with raising the ticket price. I think you got to tell people beforehand, though, well beforehand, about what your need is. And I think that people, if they have the discretionary income, they'll do that. They'll support.
So there's just a comment from the same person, Peggy H, who asked that question. It says, Ty Jones, you're on the right track, bold, out of the box, strategic thinking, stay focused on your financials.
Yep.
And now anonymous attendee, for arts and education professionals who work in social services, do we have access to the same funds that cultural organizations have? I help cultural organizations to create programs for people with dementia and their caregivers.
Well, Lane, you might be able to answer that better. So I have talked to funders who do contribute across a wide spectrum of not-for-profits. So Booth Ferris is one that comes to mind. They have social services that they support as well. I mean, the Ford Foundation, Lane can speak to the spectrum that they support. But yes, I do believe that funders that support the arts will also support other sectors as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the trick here is not to position it as an us versus them situation. There's room for funding both pieces. There's a model fund right now, the New York City COVID-19 Response and Impact Fund, which is targeted specifically to social service organizations who are jumping to the front lines and to cultural organizations. So there's a twin need that's being met by them. It offers a revolving loan for those who are dependent on government contracts that aren't coming in. So there's a sort of a payroll issue for the work that they're trying to do right now in the emergency. And then there's a sort of forgiven grant piece to this, which is frankly skewed more to the arts organization that aren't in a place to do it. So that's one place for you to look for a model. And I'll just ask, there's a final question here, and then I think we'll say goodnight to you, which is, do you know what strategies large arts organizations like the Met and MoMA will take to recover lost income from quarantine? Do they have room to fail? This is from Leslie Keogh. I might be mispronouncing that. Thanks, Leslie.
I do know David I think that's his name, yeah, over at the Met. All I would say is this: I don't know the inner workings of that institution. I believe it's a $300 million, more than that, that their budget, yearly budget is. So I don't want to speak for them. All I can say is that, do they have room to fail? Yeah, I would say, yeah. I don't believe the Met's about to close, even in this pandemic. Are big organizations going to struggle a bit? Yes, but let's just be painfully honest. Are there organizations that are too big to fail? Or let's put it this way. Let's strike what I just said. Are there organizations that have created the kinds of relationships with the folks that will make sure that they survive this pandemic? Yes, I think that is I think that's a fair statement to make.
Thanks. And I'll just offer a couple of reflections there. One is that the business model for some large organizations was faltering prior to COVID, and some of the financial vulnerability has been exposed and worsened there with the larger organizations. The response that we've seen between large, medium, and small organizations, of course, varies dramatically because their revenue sources vary. There's a big question with large institutions whether they should draw down on their endowments or not. And many are holding fast to their endowments, and they are letting go of staff, raising large questions about priorities for many in the field. A large organization like the Met, like MoMA, have there's well-publicized information about staff reductions as one way to balance the budget. And we're seeing furloughs and firing across budget size in the city. And we're hoping that some of that comes back. But they do raise large questions about a reckoning for large organizations about staff salary, who is let go first. Is it the artist of color, the educator of color, the disabled educator who's let go from the large institution first? It's raising these questions and putting them front and center, something for us to monitor.
Wow, amazing.
So I want to thank you so much, Ty, for staying with me for these last few minutes at the end, and everyone else who has stayed on. We still have 24 folks here, 7:15. I hope you all stay safe and well, and thank you to Columbia Business School.